थोड़ा ऊपर की तरफ सर.
हाँ, your face is not completely. Yeah.
We are live, ma'am. You go ahead, please.
Okay.
सुरेंद्र जी थोड़ा सा ऊपर की तरफ करना है.
I was not able to unmute myself earlier. I think we are all set now. I'll officially start the session. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all our participants, guests, principal sir, and our fellow colleagues to this valedictory session of the online refresher course in economics, organized by Department of Economics in collaboration with Teaching Learning Center of Ramanujan College.
I think Professor Surendra Kumar ka link
is I think he has left the meeting.
Looks like unka link kuch.
I'll just follow up with that.
Check. He must be rejoining. Don't worry.
Chandan sir, can you please follow up with Professor Surendra?
Yes, ma'am. I will call him. Like I'm calling him.
Yeah.
वो आ जाएंगे. Don't worry. 2 मिनट दीजिए.
हाँ जी.
ओके मैम, तो वेट करके फिर कॉल करते हैं. जब ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं
जी.
वो उनका ना कुछ इंटरनेट इशू हुआ था.
We usually have these technical glitches. These are part of online meetings.
No problem. Sometimes it do happen, but I think in our case it has been very, very rare.
Yes, sir. Yeah. All these 2 weeks we never had such a problem.
That's right.
Today was a special day for it.
Yes. So it can happen. Don't worry. उनको कोई एंट्री देने के लिए है ना? Somebody is there to.
Yes, sir. Already talked to Ravinder. He is there to manage all the things.
Okay.
But he's not picking the phone. That's why I have copied the YouTube live link and shared it in the group. Talk to Sachin, sir. He'll be sharing it in the Telegram group for participants to join.
But has Surendra sir been given the link also? Chandan sir, please send the link to.
Chandan sir, please talk to. Sir.
Oh,
yes,
sir is here.
Okay, I call him.
Yeah. No, he is come.
He is here, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Sir. Welcome, sir. Welcome. Sir, थोड़ा अपना वीडियो एडजस्ट कर लीजिए थोड़ा ऊपर की तरफ, sir.
Your laptop camera needs to be adjusted to your face.
ये desktop में inbuilt ऐसी ही है.
अच्छा, ठीक है. No problem, sir.
Okay. Okay. So may I please start the session now so that, yeah. Okay.
Now it is perfect. Go ahead.
I'll begin from the start now. Yes. So good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome again to this this online research course which is organized by Department of Economics in collaboration with Teaching Learning Center of Ramanujan College. I welcome all the participants, our guest speaker today, and our principal and my fellow colleagues. Over the last 2 weeks, we have had deep insights into the several issues of sustainable development and the best sustainability strategies. So we focused on a lot of issues related to sustainable economic growth, renewable energy, energy efficiency, green GDP, climate equity and justice, global value chains, public health, and food nutrition. There were a variety of topics which were discussed, and a lot of expertise been shared by our panel of experts. We discussed all these issues from the perspective of India, and it has been a great journey. We have got some very good feedbacks from the speakers as well as the participants and those who are organizing this this course. So today we have with us Professor Surinder Kumar, who is head of the Department of Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi. Sir, who else could have been a better and more appropriate speaker at the valedictory session today? Your presence, sir, is indeed a great source of motivation for us. If I am allowed to speak about Surinder sir, Surinder sir is a senior professor at Delhi School of Economics. Sir is also Dean Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Delhi. He holds a visiting faculty position at University of Illinois, USA, and a senior fellow at Yokohama University, Japan. Sir has a proven track record of successful research in the area of environment and resource economics, along with climate change and energy economics, with over 80 publications and journal articles, with number of books being published to his name. Thank you, sir, for joining us and accepting our invite. We are indeed grateful to have you here today. I would also like to welcome our principal, Professor S.P. Agarwal, and he's the source of strength to the department in all its activities. Thank you, sir, for always being there. I would request you to please invite Professor Surinder to deliver his lecture, and Professor Surinder will be speaking on the topic modeling production of bad outputs. Please, I would request you to invite him to deliver the lecture and also address our participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. First of all, let me once again welcome our personal friend and a good academics, good researcher, senior professor, Professor Surinder Kumar to our valedictory function. Basically, not only he will deliver his talk, but he's an expert in this area. So that is another motivation to have him this morning. I also welcome all my colleagues from economics department who have organized. Rather, let me congratulate them for this program, because it's the timely organized program, and today this is the talk of the town, not only in India but everywhere in the world, that we should work on sustainability strategies. And from Indian perspective, it is very, very relevant. The department is doing a very good job in the sense that all young people are there, and we have been over the period organized various things besides our teaching, learning, and research. I also welcome all our participants who have joined us in large numbers from all over the country, as usual in all our programs. So friends, I will not speak on the subject much, but I'll take another 2 to 5 minutes. Well, in the inaugural function, I raised few points, and I'm sure Anjali just told us that they have discussed the various strategies, and economists are the best people to frame the strategies of sustainability. And as a layman, I always feel there are a lot of issues, especially in developing countries and especially in my own country. Of course, we have been doing a lot of things, over the period. Even during Corona, we have worked on hunger, we have worked on green energy, we have worked on hydrogen energy, we have worked on climate, And there is a lot of talk these days whenever, in the NCR region, this period of September, October, November, even courts enter into this. So but the problem comes is when the problem comes, we discuss, we try to resolve, but we forget throughout the year. So now the question arises is that we have to work on these strategies throughout, and the experts, whether in the environment field, whether in the climate field, whether in the economics, because we are growing economies. We cannot sustain without economic growth, and growth brings a lot of problems. So this is the key thing. So those problems need to be addressed, because we always talk of sustainable development, we always talk of sustainable environment, we always talk of UN sustainable goals which are being set up, which started in 2015, and we have to achieve them by 2030. So, all countries must work in a systematic manner, in cohesion with each other. Otherwise, we will not be able to solve. Otherwise, the society will keep on suffering. The growth will bring a lot of things, but the sufferings of the society will increase, whether in terms of climate, whether in terms of income inequalities, whether in terms of inclusive growth, whether in terms of hunger, whether in terms of green energy, all those areas which I'm sure has been discussed here. I was attending one of the conferences on hydrogen energy, and it can be the future of the country, but again we have to develop this energy through green means only, through using the solar energy. Because what we are doing is, let us say we are producing solar energy using the fossil fuels, then it is not of any use. So all those things need to be looked into. A lot of work has been done in producing CNG, PNG, but again, we have to make sure that our dependence on fossil fuels go down. You can see even today in the world, the prices, how prices of crude petroleum is increasing day by day, because our demand for these products has increased over the period. So we have to really work in this direction. So with this, I can say, even I can give one more example. A few days ago, I was watching the TV. They were showing how much energy is used in producing the Bitcoin, and how much damage they are doing to the environment, to the carbon footprints. So I don't know whether it is absolutely necessary to do that. So we have to work, the governments have to work, and all the strategists, economists has to work together in all these directions. So with this, once again, I welcome our friend, Professor Surendra Kumar, to deliver his intellectual talk to our participants. And we are here to listen to you, sir. Thank you very much. I invite you to give your talk. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Agarwal. And thank you very much for inviting me for this talk. In this talk, I'm going to talk about this modeling bad outputs and why I've chosen this topic. This is not my choice. Basically, in the beginning, means when you are conceptualizing this program, Anjali sent me the invitation and she asked me to talk on this topic. That's it's your choice. And today I'm not going to talk any empirical application in that, but just this conceptual framework, these various approaches, they are taken in that. And as you were talking about the sustainable development, in the sustainable development concept, it's not just about the consumption side. We can say, if not more equally important, is the production side also. And you were also saying that this growth is important for us. Of course, growth is very important, but conventionally what we do, when we are talking about growth, we are talking about the production only of the marketed outputs. We are just talking about the production of those commodities which we can transact in the markets. But during this production processes, though we like or not like, we are producing multiple outputs. And some of those outputs are not desired. Some of the outputs, if they are produced beyond a limit, they become harmful for us. They are harmful for the society. So that's why the question is, when we are producing these multiple outputs, this production of these other outputs may be unintentional, but they are affecting us. So that's why it becomes important, if we are talking about the sustainable development, how to account for these outputs which we are not accounting for. And to account for, it's necessary that how we look on that, how in our this given structure we can fit that, and then have the policy implications. Okay, so today in this talk, I'm just going to take you through those basic concepts of how to model this bad output. Okay, so this talk I have planned in this way. First, I'm trying to define what we mean by a good output or a bad output. That I tried to illustrate with very simple indifference curve examples that in the textbook we used to do. In our first year textbooks we used to do. And then I would try to talk on that, sorry, that in this conventional economics. In the conventional economics, generally we say that there is only marketed outputs, no other outputs are produced. So what are these axioms of the conventional production technology or production theory? Very briefly, we talk about that. And then we talk about these various ways of considering this bad outputs, these productions. And lastly, we conclude. That way I have planned this today's talk. Okay. So what we mean by this good or bad outputs? So good output, generally we consider those outputs as a consumer, which we prefer the more. And why we prefer the more? Because if more we are consuming of those products or those commodities, we get better off. We have a higher level of satisfaction. Okay, so here, if in this notational way, we are putting it, here I am saying that this Y is the vector of good output and B is the vector of bad output. And we can say a consumer prefer more of Y to less of Y. Then we can say this Y is a good output. Y prime is greater than equal to Y, and this combination of Y prime B is preferred over Y P. Then we can say Y is a good output. And we can say a bad output, only less of that is preferred rather than the more. In case of good output, given all other things constant, we prefer more. But in case of bad, we prefer less. Okay, so a consumer prefers less of B to more of B for a given level of Y. Okay, so here this B prime is a bad output. We can say it is bad because less of it is preferred in comparison to more. B prime is less than equal to B, and this combination of Y B prime is preferred over Y B. So if less of it is preferred, then we can say it is a bad output. If more of it is preferred, then we can say it is a good output. That's simple definition we are taking. And graphically also we can see, generally we used to draw this indifference curve in these two good outputs. And then we have this downward sloping indifference curves. Okay, so here, but the case is not of two good outputs, but of one good and one bad output. Okay, so that's why this indifference curves, they are not downward sloping, but upward sloping. Okay, this II, we can say this is the first indifference curve. And here we can say, suppose this consumer is choosing this combination of YP. And now, this, if consumer is preferring more of good output, that means the consumer will move vertically. Okay, and this vertical movement leads us to this combination of y prime b, and we are keeping the b constant. On the other side, in the case of bad output, the consumer prefer less of it. By having less of it, the consumer is better off. Okay, so that's why this horizontal movement in this case we can say when the consumer is preferring less of b, then it is the yb prime. Okay, and if we draw this curve over these 2 points, then we have this 2 indifference curve, and in that sense we can say here this consumer is better off by having more of the good and less of the bad. Okay, so we are defining a bad output where consumer prefer less of it, because by having less of it the consumer becomes better. That is the simple definition we are using to defining this good and bad outputs. Okay, so now let's come to this standard axioms of production theory. Okay, so here again take a setup where this firm is producing multiple outputs using multiple inputs. Okay, and these outputs, they again we can categorize as good output and bad output as we define. So this firm or this industry is producing this y vector of the good outputs and the b vector of the bad outputs. Okay, in the good outputs we can say all these marketed outputs. But in the case of bad outputs, we can say these are the pollutants like the CO2 emissions or the other emissions, because the firms are producing multiple pollutants rather than a single pollutant. Okay, and to produce these outputs, either good or bad, this combination of good and bad outputs, they are using multiple inputs. And these inputs, they are also not of the similar nature. Some of the inputs, they are not causing any kind of pollutants like labor or capital. But some of the inputs like fossil fuels, they are causing pollutants. Okay, so means here these firms are producing good and bad outputs using both emission causing and non-emission causing inputs. Okay, and then this production technology we can represent using this T. It is saying that using these inputs, both C and X, these outputs Y and B can be produced. Okay, and in this conventional economics, we also represent this production technology using this output set or input requirement set. Okay, in the output set, what we say that this output combination is produced using these inputs. Means with the given inputs, we can produce a certain level of the output, which satisfy all those technological constraints. Or alternatively, what we can say, to produce the given level of an output, we need a certain level of inputs. That's the input requirement functions. So this production technology, we can represent by the T, P or L. Either of these concepts we can use to represent the production technology. Okay, so this conventional production technology, when we are presenting, there we have to take certain conditions, certain axioms we assume that this technology satisfies. One, this inactivity is possible. It's possible that we don't do anything. Neither we are using any inputs or nor we are producing any output. But if we put some inputs, then because this technology is closed, it's not an open-ended. This technology produced a bounded output. A certain limit is there with the given inputs we can produce that. Okay, so that's why this output set we are saying it's bounded. The production function is given, it's a bounded production function, it's not unbounded. Okay, but here we also assume that if we have to produce something, we have to put some efforts. There is no freelance. If we want the positive amount of the output, then we have to put a positive amount of it. These kind of axioms in conventional production theory we take. In the absence of this, no production economics we can talk about that. Okay, so these are the standard axioms in the production theory we take. Along with that, the conventional economics that assumes that all outputs, either good or bad, all inputs, whether they are causing emissions or not causing emissions, all we can dispose of them in free. Okay, so what we mean by this free disposability of the inputs or outputs? Okay, so when you are drawing this production function, if take the case of single input, single output, by using this X, you are producing Y, and then you draw this production function, which is concave kind of function. Okay, so there what you are saying that either you are operating on the frontier or below the frontier. For the given inputs, you can produce a certain output which is bounded by the technology or less than that. Okay, so what it implies? It implies that this output is fairly disposable. We can produce less of the output or the output which is bounded by the technology or less than that of with the given inputs. To produce less of an output, we are not required to put more inputs. Then we can define this output is fairly disposable. Okay, that's fine if we are talking about the desired output, the good outputs. But is it true for the bad outputs? That we have to understand. Okay. Similarly, in the case of inputs, what we do, we use this concept of the isoquants. In the isoquant, what we say, to produce this given level of output, firm can use any combination of the inputs. And the same level of output can be produced by the more quantity of the inputs. Free disposability of the inputs implies that to produce the same level of the outputs, we can use more of the inputs. Then the inputs are fairly disposable. These kind of assumptions or the axioms, conventional production theory is supposed to satisfy. And these concepts, these axioms, they are fine if we are talking about good inputs or good outputs. If we have interest in emission causing inputs or the bad outputs, then these concepts may not be more helpful. We need to understand why it's not helpful. Okay, so these are the standard axioms of a production theory, which is not considering or not differentiating between good and bad outputs or emission causing and non-emission causing inputs. So now let's come to this main question of modeling bad outputs. Okay. When we are talking about this modeling of bad outputs, what we observe in the empirical data? In the empirical data, you observe that, for example, say, when you are producing electricity by burning coal, more of CO2 emissions will be there. Means there is a positive association between good and bad outputs. These good and bad outputs, they are jointly produced. They are not rival. In some of the products, we find that if we have to produce more of one, then we can produce less of the other. But in this case, if we are producing more of one, more of both is produced. Okay, so means there is a positive relationship between both good and bad outputs when empirically we see the data. Okay. So this positive association between good and bad outputs, that gives us the idea to think different ways for modeling of this bad outputs. In this example of electricity generation using coal, we said that there is positive association between the electricity generated and the CO2 emissions. But we also observe that there is a positive association between the coal used and electricity generated. If we are using more of the inputs, more of the output is means there is positive association between that. Okay, so what it says that? It says that this bad outputs, we may treat them like inputs, but this bad outputs we can reduce in Fourier. So their reduction should be some costly way or something else. So these are the different ways. And first of all, in the conventional framework, what we do, we are considering that these bad outputs, they can be disposed of in Fourier. Fourier disposability means we can produce, if we have to produce less of that, we can do so without incurring any cost. Without putting any efforts, we can produce less of the bad output. That is the Fourier disposability of the bad outputs. If that is true, then why we are producing these bad outputs at all? That's counter rationality. Assuming Fourier disposability of the bad outputs, which in the conventional economics is assumed, is counter to rationality. It's in conflict with the notion of rationality. It's not rational behavior because less is preferred. Less is preferred, and if we can produce less of that without incurring any cost, then the question is why we are producing at all that. We should not do that. Okay, so assuming this Fourier disposability of the bad, that itself is a bad idea, which in the conventional economics is assumed. Okay, so the alternate ways are these three ways, considering these bad outputs as inputs, considering these bad outputs as weakly disposable bad outputs, weakly disposable outputs, rather than considering them as inputs, we consider them as outputs. And third idea is for modeling is these bad outputs, we say it is the byproduct of this production technology. If we consider that way, then how it helps us understanding or this modeling of the bad output in the production processes, how we internalize those externalities and rectify that. So these are the questions that we are trying to answer. Okay, so these bad outputs as conventional production inputs. So if we are saying them as inputs, so what it implies? It implies that if we use less of these inputs, with the more quantity of these inputs, we can produce the same level of the output. Okay, all other things we are assuming the same. Okay, so here, the same level of output can be produced with the same quantity of the input or the more quantity of the input. That is the Fourier disposability of the inputs. And now let's go back to the same example of this electricity generation using coal. Okay, so according to this Fourier disposability assumption, if we use more of the coal, we can produce same level of electricity and same level of the CO2 emissions. But if we increase coal, then it's not further possible to produce the same level of the CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions get increased. So means this Fourier disposability of the input assumptions get violated in that. Okay, so modeling this Fourier disposability of inputs, that assumptions get violated if we try to model this bad outputs as inputs. So that's why it's again not acceptable way of doing it. Second is the way the approach which was populated by this literature starting with this mid-80s onwards, by Rollo Fair and his colleagues. And I'm also in that category. They say that these bad outputs, these emissions, they are not inputs. They are outputs. Assuming them inputs, it violates the standard axioms of the production theory. And why you are doing? Because there is positive association that you are observing. That's why you are doing so, but it's wrong. And in that way, the policy implications or this internalizing the externalities, that may not be, we will not be able to do so. So when they are saying these bad outputs, they are the outputs, they are not inputs. And to model them in the production process, if we want to reduce them, we cannot reduce them in free, we have to incur the cost. Okay, and when we are saying these bad outputs as inputs, what we are consider that? If we are reducing them, then there is some abatement. We have to divert the resources. That kind of framework was in our mind. Okay, but here they are taking two assumptions in that. Two axioms they are talking about. One, these good and bad outputs, they are null joint. Okay. So what they mean by this null jointness? They say that these two outputs, they are jointly produced. If we want to produce a positive amount of the electricity using coal, then inevitably some positive amount of CO2 emissions will be produced. That is the null jointness. It's not possible to produce electricity without producing CO2 emissions if we are using it. This is this axiom of the null jointness. The other axioms that they are talking about is the weak disposability rather than the free or strong disposability of the bad outputs. They say that this weak disposability assumption says that with the given inputs, we can produce less of the electricity, but we cannot produce less of the emission. Means this electricity disposal is in free, but disposal of CO2 emission is not in free. And if we have to reduce the CO2 emissions, then we have to reduce the production of electricity also. Means these two outputs, they are proportionally linked to each other. They are linked to each other. If we have to reduce the emissions, we have to necessarily reduce the electricity. And the logic is that here, to reduce emissions, we have to divert some resources from the generation of the electricity in the abatement activities, and as a result, less of electricity will be produced. Okay, but here, what is to note is this weak disposability framework. It's fine, it's saying these bad outputs, they are outputs, they are not inputs. They cannot be disposed of in free. That's fine. There's no problem into that. But what they assume? They consider all inputs in this of the same nature. They are not able to differentiate between emission causing inputs and non-emission causing inputs. They are considering labor and coal in a similar way. If we employ more labor to produce the same output, it's not harming anyone. But if we employ more coal to produce the same level of electricity, then more of CO2 emission will be produced. So what it implies that this free disposability of emission causing input, that they are not considering. That is the weakness of this weak disposability framework. Moreover, here, when we talk about this empirical framework to estimate such kind of technologies, when we are assuming this predisposability of good output and weak disposability of the bad outputs and all other inputs, the production technology can be modeled in this way, where we are saying the output that you are producing that is less than equal to the frontier output. The frontier output is greater than equal to the output that you are. That's observed by you. And in case of inputs, this X is the input, C is the input, emission causing inputs. In both of the inputs, what they are saying, this isoquant level of this input, that's less than equal to the inputs that you are using. But in case of bad outputs, what it is saying that this frontier level of the output, it is equal to the observed output. So we are modeling these bad outputs by converting this inequality into the equality. If we consider inequality, that means we are considering it's not fairly disposable. And here, these Zs, they are providing us this frontier, which are the convex combination of these inputs or outputs. Okay, but here, what is the problem? Problem is that this framework is also violate this material balance condition. In our elementary physics, this first law of thermodynamics, what we study that? There we studies that the sum total of inputs is equal to the sum total of the outputs. Okay, and here in this framework, this material balance, or you can say this first law of thermodynamics, that's why those conditions are not satisfied. Okay, moreover, in this framework, what we do, we are considering this production technology as a black box. We are not trying to understand the process. Okay, so here we are saying we are putting the inputs and then there are the outputs. But how these outputs are produced, how abatements are done, we are just ignoring that. So means these production technologies, they are presented like a black box. Okay. So that's why the alternate is, rather than considering this technology as a black box, let's try to understand that this production takes place in a network framework rather than a black box. Okay. So here when we are seeing this network, that means there are two production technology P1 and P2. Production technology P1, if we use the same example, that's for producing electricity, and P2 is the abatement technology, where these emissions get abated. These thermal power plants, they are producing electricity, SO2 emissions, particulate matters, those things they are doing. So to abate these SO2 emissions, we need to employ subscribers. These covers we have to use. We have to use these covers. Those kind of technologies we have to use, that is the P2. Okay, but in this cover technology, there also we have to employ the inputs. We have the total inputs, and this total inputs we can use in this two production technology for producing electricity and for abating SO2 emissions, this labor and capital. Okay, and then there is some final amount of electricity YF, final output, and SO2 emissions that is coming out, that we are disposing in this ambient environment. Okay, so within the black box, the good output Y is either a final output or an intermediate output. Within this box, Y is produced. Some of this Y is used for abatement. And some of this Y is sold in the market for this final consumption. Okay, so that's why this Y is further decomposed into YI and YF. YI means used as an intermediate input and YF as a final output. Okay, this abatement technology has YI and BI. These are the intermediate inputs for this P2. YI and BI along with axis, they are the inputs for production technology P2. Okay, and this we can understand through this figure also. Here, this X is the inputs. Labor, capital, coal, all these are the inputs. These inputs we are using for electricity. Labor, capital, coal. Some of this labor and capital we have not used, but sent for this abatement activities, P2. Okay. In this P1, we produced electricity and SO2 emissions using labor, capital, and coal. And then what we did, we produced electricity and emissions. These emissions and some of the electricity, they are going into this P2 technology. And this electricity, that's also going to the consumers, this final output. So after abatement is carried out, most of these emissions, they are disposed of. But some of these emissions we are not able to abate, and then they are thrown in the ambient environment. So this YF and BF, they are the final outputs. So in this framework, the production is taking place as a network. So in this network, you can say, if we have to model this output set of this final outputs, here in the first, we have this Y and BI. They are the intermediate. BI is the intermediate and input for the technologies 2. That way we are considering. And this final output is the combination of these 2. In the second technology, these 3 are the inputs they are using. Means rather than considering this technology as a black box, we need to consider it as a network of the technologies. Okay. Which we can say is the foundations for this bioproduction technology. Okay. So that's why this third way, this bad output as byproduct of the good output, that bioproduction technology. Okay. In the bioproduction technology, what we do, we differentiate between this rival product and joint product. In the rival products, what we can say, if we are producing more of one, less of the other is produced. Okay. But in joint production processes, both of these outputs are produced joint. There is no rivalry into that. Similarly, we need to differentiate between emission causing and non-emission causing. This labor and capital, they are different than the coal. This coal input cannot be disposed of in free. If we employ more of the coal, more of the emissions will be there. But labor and capital, if we are using more, they will not cause any harm. And this disposal of bad outputs, that's not important. So that's the bioproduction technology. So in the bioproduction technology, what we say that the production technology is the intersection of 2 technologies, 2 production technology. One production technology is producing this marketed output, and the other production technology is producing this. T1 is producing this marketed output, and T2 is producing this emissions. And the production technology is the intersection of these 2 technologies. Okay. So in production technology T1, we can consider like a conventional. Here, all these inputs, we can say they are fairly disposable, either emission causing or non-emission causing. The output are fairly disposable and only good output is there. That is the conventional standard framework for considering the production of this good output, which is technology T1. But this technology T2, which is producing emissions, that is not a similar way of this T1. In technology T2, this good output production we need not to consider. But these inputs and bad outputs. This bad output is not considered like a good output. Here it's less than equal to. It's less than. It's B is greater than equal. Just opposite to that we have to consider. Means these emissions we cannot dispose of in free. If we have to dispose of these emissions, we have to incur the cost. Their disposal is costly. Second, this emission causing inputs, this coal. If we have to reduce the coal to reduce emissions, that will not happen in free. For that sake, we have to put more efforts. That's the technology too. And the complete production technology is the intersection of these two technologies. That is the one. Okay. So here, to make the frontier of these two technology and then their intersection. In the first technology, we are seeing this good output that we are producing. It's less than the frontier output, or we can produce at the frontier. The input use of this X is more than or equal to the combination of inputs available at the iso point. Either is the emission causing or non-emission causing. That way we are formulating this production frontier in this T1 technology, or we can say the technology for producing the good output. But in the production of bad outputs, this technology says what? This production of bad outputs, it's either more, it's above the frontier or at the frontier. It's not less than, it's above or equal to the frontier. Similarly, in case of this emission causing inputs, the input use, this C, is less than this frontier or less than or equal to that. And this complete production technology is the intersection of these two technologies. And where these Z and alphas, they help us in formulating this frontiers. They are making this combination of those frontiers. These are the different ways we can say, if we have to model the production of bad outputs, we can model them as inputs. If we are modeling them as inputs, then we are violating certain axioms of that. Then there is this weak disposability assumption with respect to bad outputs. And third is this bioproduction technology. These are the different ways of modeling bad outputs. Each of the approach has its own shortcomings, and we can say this weak disposability or bioproduction technologies, they capture more reality in comparison to considering this bad output as fairly disposable outputs or considering them as inputs. These are the different approaches about modeling bad outputs. Okay, so given that, what we can say, this modeling or this emission generating technology is an important area for you to work. Though there is some work in this area, but there is big scope to in that, because this generally these policy frameworks, they consider still this bad output as fairly disposable, which is not. Second, this emission generating, this kind of technologies, they are presenting the reality in the sense that because the conventional frameworks, they assume this generation of emission is separate from the production of the good outputs. These two are not separated. They are jointly produced. And third, what we can say, using these kind of frameworks, even in the absence of the data, where these production technologies are joined, we can get the cost of reducing these numerical values, these quantity values of reducing emissions. Those kind of estimates we can get. And if we have those kind of emissions, means what is the cost of regulations? Then we can think about the policies that help us in internalizing these externalities, or what could be least cost way of abating these emissions. Okay, so I stop here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for this enlightened presentation. We are now opening our session for discussion and question answers. Participants are requested to post their questions on the chat column of the YouTube channel. I see there have been a lot of comments today where people have been greeting and appreciating the presentation, saying that it's been really nice, and appreciating the presentation. But I think they're taking some time to ask the questions. Sir, I would now request, and I can welcome other participants as well as the fellow colleagues who want to ask their questions can now ask their queries to Professor Surinder Kumar. Any question? Okay, sir, by the time people are making their mind of asking you something, your presentation, while you were presenting, this thought came to my mind, and I thought I'll ask you. So when we're talking about abating the production possibility, abating the production technology, waiting for production technology in your production possibility. The technology that we were talking about would be specifically how should we differentiate between these technologies, the technologies which are now being called as green, to the prior technologies already inbuilt in the production process. So does the model give us that scope to distinguish between the technologies?
Yes, basically that's the objective. In the conventional literature, we consider this production of the emission that's happening separately from the production of the main output. And these frameworks, they say that both these outputs are produced jointly. They are not separately produced. Even you can say this abatement, that's not happen. For example, say in the case of CO2 emissions, we cannot abate them separately like this water pollutant or the other air pollutants. Here, if you have to reduce the CO2 emissions, you have to change your main production technology.
Right.
So means both these outputs, either good or bad, you want or not want, but they are produced jointly. So that's why those kind of framework can give you a better understanding how this production is happening and what way we can reduce those emissions. Then only we can talk about this policy.
So, sir, when it comes to incorporating the cost of this abatement, and when we say that these are jointly produced, how to figure out the cost which is coming out for this joint production?
Okay, means basically you can say one is the conventional way of producing, where you are saying what? That these emissions can be disposed of in free. Okay, and why these firms are not considering these emissions in their production structure? Because they know that there is no regulations. So that's why they can dispose of this pollution in the environment. And this is happening. But now as you introduce these regulations, what it implies that these firms are compelled to reduce the emissions. That means we need to model that these emissions, they are not fairly disposable. Their disposal is costly. Okay, right. So if that kind of framework we take, so as a result, what will happen? This marketed output that you will be able to produce, if there is regulations, that will be less with the given inputs in comparison to a situation where there is no regulations. Okay, the difference between these two can give you the idea what is the cost of this regulation, what is the abatement cost.
Right, right. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for that answer. I have another question which has come from Mr. Zakarullah Khan, and he says, can we extend bad output model, which is rooted in micro foundations, to macroeconomic models?
Yes,
Sir,
we can do so. Okay, basically here what we are saying that either we say at the macro level or micro level, means how these factors are linked, that we are talking about. Okay, even at the macro level, if we just talk about the GDP and ignore this emission productions, if we at the macro level say you are producing GDP, which is a good output, but along with that you are producing these emissions, which we are ignoring. Ignoring means we are modeling them as fully disposable.
right.
So that's why these models can be extended at macro level.
Okay, thank you. There's another question. I'll take that. I think we'll take this last question and then we'll continue with our valedictory session. We have a couple of things which are lined down after this discussion session. Sir, I'll just read out the last question for you. What the question is as follows: what are the sustainability perspectives or of good and bad outputs? Please describe the future applicability of this model.
Like in the beginning, we said that we are talking about sustainable development. Okay. In the sustainable development, what we mean by that? We are talking about basically the production or consumptions which are not compromising the future generation. That's the main objective. Okay, so here in this production processes, if we keep producing these emissions and we consider them as predisposable, that means what? This scenario is not sustainable. For sustainability means we need to find a balance between the production of good and bad output. Okay, it's not that just we need a zero level of the emissions. If we want to say zero emissions, that means there is no good output also because there is null joint. Okay, so to think about proper policy framework for sustainability, we need to properly model this production processes. We consider good and bad output differently, not symmetrically. That's the objective.
Right. Thank you so much. Do we have another?
I have a question if I'm allowed to ask.
Yes, sir. Please, Lord.
Okay. Sir, the presentation is quite mathematical and I try to understand it as, I have this question, sir, like the model offers the internalization of negative externality. And if I understood it correctly, so it is like we can stop it right from the source where the negative externality is generating. So in this case, we have like a better solution in a sense ki we are having separate regulation and separate, like everything, every setup is there to see ki what is happening and how to control it. And through this model, we are just stopping it or controlling it right at the source. So, and that can be reflected in the pricing of the like goods or services that particular unit might be producing. So it is very impressive model, but I just wanted to know if we are like, if such model is being followed like in somewhere in the world or in our country in some context or not.
So Chandan, here these standard regulations that they say that first you produce the emissions and then abate them. This is the regulatory framework in which we are working. But these emissions, you can reduce in different ways. It's not just end of pipe treatment is possible, but within the pipe, at the beginning of the pipe, those kind of solutions are also available. And this conventional, or you can this standard regulatory framework, it considers just end of pipe treatment. So that's why in the case of water pollutions, in the policy, you might have read somewhere that to have this plant, for example, in leather industry or other big industries, there you have to be an abatement plant also. Okay, but this emissions we can reduce by changing production processes, by changing input mix, Those things are not considered. And these approaches means changing the production processes or changing the input mix, which may be more cost effective in comparison to this end of pipe treatments. So these models give us those ways that these regulators should not focus just on this end of pipe treatment, but they should also consider these process changes or input mix changes. Means they should focus more on the final outcome rather than how this production is happening. That way we can.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. This has been a great takeaway. Actually, at the policy level, it is important that right in the we consider the regulation not at the end of the pipeline, but try to change the way the processes are happening right from the beginning till the end. They are made more sustainable. Thank you so much, sir, for that knowledge that you have shared with us. We will now move ahead with our session, and I will like to welcome my colleague, Mrs. Isha Gupta. She will be presenting the feedback report for the 2-week refresher course, which has been organized by this department. Isha ma'am, please, you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Thank you, Anjali. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
And I hope everybody can, I think, view the screen that I'm sharing.
Yes, your presentation is visible.
Yes, all right. So thank you very much. And a very warm good afternoon to all the members present here for the last bit of, the feedback analysis. And I think now as we inch towards the conclusion of this round of FDP. So I think I'll just walk you through all the themes and the sub themes that the FDP looked at. It encompassed not only considering a broader perspective of sustainability strategies. So the themes, they encompassed environment, climate justice, growth, particularly in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, global value chains, food security, and renewable energy and energy efficiency. So in order to devise suitable sustainability strategies and what should be the way ahead in the future. So the themes and the sub-themes, they were organized by 16 resource persons from all over India. They belong to various reputed institutes and universities. So if I come down to the highlight of the program, so as you can see, we had 331 registered participants with more than 20,000 viewership, that the most of that all the recorded lectures and the live sessions they received. And when it came to the feedback part of the program, we adopted as the department adopted a 4-quadrant approach where our feedback where we took feedback responses not only from the participants with regard to the day-wise sessions or the overall program, but we also looked at and took feedback from the resource persons and from the organizing team members, so that their comments and suggestions can be incorporated to make the training programs a better version of their present. So if I look at, if I just take a view of the participant data, so we had a huge, participants from multiplicity of, regions and universities, where nearly 94% of the participants belong to outside Delhi universities and institutes. So that was something which was a very nice, the reach that the program made in this particular round. And now, if I start with the first quadrant, the first leg of the feedback analysis from the participants. So with regard to the learning management system, with regard to its functioning or the user-friendly interface, so nearly everybody, 90-95% have, they gave very strongly positive responses in favor of the this particular management system, and the regarding their, the way they were able to operate it very easily, conveniently through the system. And on an average, if we also asked participants regarding the number of hours that they spent on an average. So it ranged between 3 to 5 hours by an average participant on any average day during the course of the program. And when it came to the participants, when they were asked about the conceptualization of the program, the sequencing of the program, so about 95% they gave very good to excellent responses. Rather, about 70% of the participants also prefer that more sessions and more themes can further be conceptualized, can further be organized in this particular program under the given broader set of themes that were undertaken. In terms of the resource persons, there what value addition that in terms of the quality of the resource persons, also we had very favorably, very good responses. In terms of the overall content of the program, also they were hugely highly positive responses, with nearly 98% of the people giving the scores of 3 to 5 on a scale of 5. And in terms of value addition and the knowledge that was gained, so that was also nearly 98 to 99% of the responses which were in the affirmative. And but this was one question that when we asked both the resource persons in their feedback questionnaire, and even from the participants, if they would be willing to recommend this FDP organized by the Department of Economics of Ramanujan College. So everybody has said yes. So everybody stated a very definite yes. So that was a very key highlight of the our feedback response analysis. The second quadrant of our feedback analysis from the resource persons, we when they were asked regarding the conceptualization, structuring, and the way regarding the time that was allocated to them, the sequencing of the theme, and the topics which we were selected. So even resource persons were quite satisfied, and they strongly agreed and gave positive responses to the to the way the entire FDP was structured. And as far as the organizing team members are concerned, again, when the same questions were even posed with the organizing team members, most of them again gave a 5 on 5 as far as the structuring and the sequencing of the program is concerned. And we specifically also asked organizing team members to identify key efficiency points that can be replicated in the future, so that more betterment, much betterment can be done for future training programs. So a key advantage point and a key efficiency point that came up in the analysis, besides the fact that yes, we had a very good technical support from the Teaching and Learning Center, very user-friendly portal of the LMS, but the key point came up was a teamwork of the department, the way the department organizing members, the way they colluded, the way they organized, selected the topics, contacted the resource persons, the way the entire work was systematically carried out over the last 2 months, the way communication and everything was outlined and compiled. And despite the fact that some members, organizing team members, were also down with COVID-19 themselves during the peak of the third wave in January, but despite that, we kept the ship sailing, and fortunately the program turned out to be a huge success. So I think really would like to thank all the members and the resource persons and the registered participants, and I hope that they keep registering and keep participating in our department organized training programs. And now with this, I have concluded and I come to an end of the feedback analysis report. So I think now, Anjali, I'll move on to you, and I'll ask you, I think then you can.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that brilliant feedback that we have received from our participants and all the members who are involved in this FDP. I would personally like to thank everyone. I'll be taking out the names also, but before that, we have joined. Some participants have joined us in this meeting, and it will be great to have them speak with us on what was their experience during this 2 weeks refresher course. So I would like to call upon Mr. Zakirullah Khan from Begusarai, Bihar. Sir, would you like to give your comments on the FDP? Mr. Zakirullah Khan.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it was nice experience with the teaching learning center. 1 minute, ma'am. I can
Okay.
So, okay.
If you want to take time, I can call upon the next participant. And
No,
by the
I'm
time,
fine. I'm not fine. I'm fine now. So it was really nice that okay, we cannot physically meet, so it was great platform to enhance our knowledge. And I'm new to the environmental economics, so it was really good takeaway from this. The presentation and the resource person was really good. And only one request is that that research like study material or reference material could be provided simultaneously so that we can refer for the future reference. So that will be better.
absolutely, absolutely. Our technical team has been up on that, and we have been providing the PPTs as well as the research material also. I'll see what can we do more about it. Thank you.
Okay, it was really nice experience with the teaching center.
Thank you so much.
once again.
Thank you very much. Please stay connected with our department.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
So, yes, thank you, Zakir sir. Okay. I would also like to call upon Mr. Bhaskar from Guwahati. Mr. Bhaskar, would you like to give some comments? Mr. Bhaskar?
Good afternoon. Hello.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yeah. So it's been very nice actually. Every sessions and the PPTs, even the live sessions we joined, were very interactive and very useful. But ma'am, yeah, from today only we are facing some issues. I think you were aware about that.
Yeah, they were technical
Just look-
glitches today.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's been very excellent, ma'am. It's been so nice.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for being there. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for registering. And we hope that all our participants will continue to be in touch with us with all our activities that our department will be taking up. We'll be getting connected with everybody. Thank you.
Surely, yeah.
So that
Ma'am,
was
one second. The issue which the Mr. Bhaskar has quoted over here in the chat box already communicated. Within some time, this will be resolved.
okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So these online sessions, obviously, there is always a possibility of technical glitches coming in. We tried to, I think we were very lucky not to have these technical glitches in the previous sessions, but this session there was some, and they have been taken care of. Thank you. So I would request now Principal Sir, if Principal Sir is in the meeting. I think it doesn't seem to be in the meeting. Could just address the participants a little. Okay. So I suppose Principal Sir has left the meeting. Admin, will Principal Sir be joining us? Admin Ramanujan? Okay. Are we supposed to wait for Principal Sir to join again? Okay, then I can give the vote of thanks and then conclude this session for today. Will that be fine, Saurav sir? That be fine?
Yes, ma'am, it's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so to just conclude this session, and we have had a great journey of the 2-week refresher course, and so I'll just would like to thank everybody, our director, Professor Principal SP Agarwal, who is a great source of strength to us. I would also like to thank Dr. Nikhil Kumar Rajput, who is the Deputy Director of Teaching Learning Center, along with the Assistant Directors, Dr. Sumit Nagpal and Dr. Aprajita Majumdar. I would also like to thank our entire technical team, who has been headed by Mr. Vipin Rathi, my organizing team, Dr. Sachin Tomar, Dr. Ashish Shukla, Dr. Saurav Kumar Srivastava, Mrs. Isha Gupta, Mr. Chandan Kumar Sharma, Mr. Sonu Kumar, Mrs. Asta Jain, and Mr. Vishal Raj. Thank you all for being there and making this program a great success. Okay, thank you. See you guys. Have a nice day. Thank you.